He never served a day. Those words came from my son's mouth, sharp as a blade, clean enough to leave no blood, just silence. The courtroom, polished wood, cold marble floors, sunlight bleeding through tall windows, fell so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat pressing against my ribs. For a moment, I thought I misheard him. But then he said it again, louder this time, like he wanted to echo. My father never served. Not a day. He's been lying my whole life. I didn't move, didn't blink. My palms rested flat on the table in front of me. The grainy would cool beneath my skin. My lawyer leaned slightly in my direction, waiting for me to react, to defend myself, to break the silence my son had just weaponized. But I didn't give him that satisfaction. I kept my eyes on the judge, not on the boy, no, the man I raised. The judge's expression didn't shift. She just adjusted her glasses slightly and looked down at the files before her. My son stood tall on the witness stand, expensive suit, polished confidence. His voice didn't shake. If anything, it carried pride. He's using fictional service to manipulate the will. There are no records, no medals, nothing. I swallowed slowly. My throat burned. Everyone was looking at me. Family members, strangers, lawyers who didn't know a thing about my life but thought they understood the truth because they held paper in their hands. Papers that said my service didn't exist. I felt the weight of the small, cold object in my coat pocket. The worn service medal. The one I never wore in public. The judge finally looked at me. "Mr. Harris," she said calmly, "do you intend to respond to your son's statement?" My son's jaw was tight. He didn't look at me. He looked through me, like I was a ghost lingering in a life that no longer belonged to me. Memories flickered behind my eyes. His 5th birthday, when I came home in uniform and he wouldn't let go of my leg. His high school graduation, where I sat in the back row so he wouldn't feel embarrassed. The night he told me he was in a law school and I said, "Make me proud," and he answered, "I've been doing that on my own." I took a slow breath. My voice could have cracked the air, but I kept it buried in my chest. I didn't answer the judge. Not yet. Instead, I reached down into my leather bag and placed a sealed manila envelope on the table before me. My son let out a quiet, mocking laugh. Prop documents? Really, I finally turned to look at him. He froze, just for a second, because I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was tired. The judge's eyes shifted to the envelope, then back to me. "Mr. Harris, is that for the court?" "It is," I said quietly. "And what is inside?" Everything that was never meant to be spoken out loud. I replied. A hush rolled across the room, like a cold wind. The judge nodded to the bailiff. "Please bring it forward." The envelope left my hands. My son's lawyer leaned toward him and whispered something. My son smirked. He thought he'd already won. The bailiff handed the envelope to the judge. She broke the red seal slowly, as if aware that the air itself had thickened. She pulled out the first document. Her eyes moved across the lines, then stopped. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at my son. Her face went pale. That was when I saw it. The first crack in her composure. The courtroom waited. The sunlight on the polished floor felt colder now. She lifted her gaze to me. Her voice was softer than before. "Mr. Harris, where did you get this?" I held her stare. From a place my son believes never existed. The judge didn't respond immediately. She looked at the clerk, then at the bailiff, then at the door, then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Seal this court." And just like that, every door lock clicked shut. The metallic clink of the courtroom doors locking echoed like distant chains in a prison corridor. No one moved. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. My son blinked, confusion tightening his features. "What's going on?" he whispered, but no one answered. Not even his lawyer, whose confidence had drained from his face like color from dying leaves. The judge placed the documents down with careful precision, her fingertips pressing against the paper as though steadying herself. "No one is to enter or leave this courtroom until further notice," she said. her voice firmer now. The bailiff nodded, hands resting just above his holster. The atmosphere shifted from courtroom formality to something heavier, classified, controlled. My son leaned toward the microphone. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Whatever my father... The judge raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Harris, Jr. He hesitated, then, visibly unsettled, obeyed. I could feel his eyes burning into me, demanding answers I wasn't ready to give. My fingers curled slightly against my knee. I didn't look at him. I kept my focus on the judge, just as I'd learned to focus on the horizon through smoke and sandstorms, steady, unblinking. The judge turned another page from the envelope. She exhaled, slow and deliberate. These documents are stamped with federal clearance codes, she said quietly. Level 6, involving covert operations under sealed authority. A murmur rippled through the room. My son's mouth parted slightly. He looked at me as though seeing a stranger. I closed my eyes for a moment, and just like that, heat dust, the sound of helicopter blades. My memories weren't memories anymore. They were present. Flashback. Kandahar Province, 1983. Keep your head down, Harris. Sergeant Morales shouted as the night exploded with gunfire. The desert smelled like smoke and copper. I remember gripping my rifle, heart pounding so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. There was a boy next to me, Williams, barely 20. He was shaking. You're going to be all right, I told him, voice steady even though my hands weren't. Just breathe. He nodded, eyes wide, trusting me. Moments later, a blast split the ground. Williams fell, quiet, as though even death respected the silence of that night. Back to the courtroom. I opened my eyes. My breathing slowed. My son was still staring. The judge rested her hands together, fingertips pressed under her chin. Mr. Harris, she said, why was your service never recorded in public military archives? I answered softly, because I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to be forgotten. Gasps. A woman in the second row covered her mouth with her hand. My son scoffed under his breath. Try to reclaim control. There's still no proof he ever. The judge cut him off. There is more than proof. There are mission logs, commendations, casualty reports, and a classified photograph. She turned the page. My son went pale. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering frantically now. I saw that photograph in my mind's eye before she even pulled it from file. A group of 12 soldiers. Dust-covered, sunburned, eyes hollow. Among them me, younger, thinner, wearing a uniform with no name tag. Standing in the desert, holding the dog tags of someone who didn't come back. The judge looked at me again. Why now, after all these years of silence? I didn't answer immediately. How could I explain that silence was the only thing the government let me keep? That some wars followed you home and sat at your dinner table unspoken? My voice, when it came, was steady, because my son called me a liar, and I've carried enough ghosts to know truth deserves at least one witness. He flinched. The judge leaned back in her chair. Her tone softened, not with sympathy, but with gravity. There are more documents here. Some are not for public view. Her eyes flicked to the bailiff. Bring the projection screen down. A long mechanical hum filled the room as the white screen lowered from the ceiling. I felt my pulse slow, heavy and deliberate. My son swallowed hard. The judge lifted another sheet from the envelope. Prepared display Exhibit C. The projector clicked on, casting a cold glow. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room waiting as the images began to fill the screen. Proof of a life my son had refused to see. Proof of battles fought in shadows and silence and alone. The light from projector washed over the courtroom in pale blue rectangles, illuminating faces frozen in disbelief. My son's confident smirk faltered the moment the first photograph appeared. 12 soldiers crouched behind a sand dune, rifles raised, eyes scanning the horizon. Dust clung to their uniforms like a second skin. And there I was, younger, thinner, barely recognizable, holding dog tags in trembling hands. Dog tags that belonged to a man whose life ended before his own story could be told. The judge's eyes never left the image. She seemed to inhale the gravity of it. Leaning forward slightly, fingers pressed together beneath her chin, my son opened his mouth, but no words came out. The projection shifted to another image, a report stamped with top secret in bold red letters, detailing missions that had never touched the news, operations erased from public record. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the one that never leaves you after years in the field. The weight of lives carried, decisions made in silence, the burden of protecting truths that could never be shared. Every mission had a cost, every victory a shadow. My son didn't understand that. He never would, until now. The judge turned a page and held it up for all to see. A commendation certificate, sealed for decades, recognizing acts of valor that no one else could know. She spoke softly, almost reverently. These actions saved countless lives, Mr. Harris. Why were they never recognized? I let out a slow breath, because some wars aren't meant to be celebrated. Some sacrifices are only for the people you protect. My son's face turned red, not from anger, but from shock. His arrogance, polished over years of believing he knew everything about his father, was cracking. His eyes darted between me, the judge, and the screen, desperately searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft hum of the projector. I remembered nights in distant deserts, huddled with men who became brothers, listening to distant explosions and knowing that one wrong move meant the end. I remembered Williams and the others who never made a home, and I thought about how I had carried their silence into every family dinner, every birthday, every milestone my son achieved without me by his side. The judge glanced at my son. "Do you have any further questions for your father, Mr. Harris, Jr.?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. The words wouldn't come. The bravado, the mockery, all of it had evaporated. He finally whispered, almost to himself, "Dad, is this real?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I didn't need to. The images, the documents, the silent way of truth, they spoke louder than I ever could. The judge shifted her attention back to the envelope. She pulled out a thin, unassuming folder, flipping it open with deliberate care. These documents pertain to operations that cannot be publicly disclosed. "Mr. Harris, did you ever speak of these to anyone outside your unit?" "Never," I said. "Not to friends, not a family. Some truths are too dangerous to share. Some lives are too fragile to risk by telling them." My son's jaw dropped slightly, a visible shiver running through him. He took a step back, instinctively, like the courtroom itself had grown larger and more intimidating. His lawyer whispered urgently into his ear, but he didn't respond. The judge leaned back in her chair. "You see, Mr. Harris, Jr., history doesn't always leave a paper trail. Sometimes it lives in the memory of those who bear it." I kept my gaze steady, meeting the judge's eyes, then letting them wander to my son's. He was still trembling, the pride he had leaned on for years eroded by the weight of facts he had refused to imagine. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the one that only comes when the truth finally surfaces after decades of silence. The courtroom air felt heavier, denser, as if the very walls had absorbed the tension and refused to release it. The judge's voice softened again, almost a whisper. "This court will now review these documents in closed session. The details are not for public record. Officers, please secure the room." The bailiff moved swiftly, his presence commanding. My son looked at me then, eyes wide, voice barely audible. "Dad, I didn't answer. I simply allowed the silence to carry the weight my words never could. Every memory, every secret mission, every ghost I carried alone for decades rested here, in the courtroom, finally seen. And for the first time in years, I felt a fraction of the relief that comes when a life's worth of hidden sacrifices is finally acknowledged. The doors of the courtroom closed behind the last officer. the faint echo lingering like the remnants of a storm. The room had shifted. The air was thick with unspoken truths, heavy with the weight of secrets finally exposed. My son stood frozen, a man confronting the realities of a father he had never truly seen. His arrogance, polished over decades, had crumbled in the space of a few photographs, a few documents, and a quiet authority of years lived in service no one else could comprehend. The judge motioned toward me. "Mr. Harris, before we proceed, you may explain the context for these documents. For the record." I nodded slightly, feeling the leather of my coat crease beneath my fingers as I gripped the edge of the table. My voice came steady, deliberate. I was deployed overseas for years in covert operations. My service was classified. The missions were dangerous, unrecorded publicly for national security. I never spoke of them because those I served with, some didn't come back, and their sacrifices weren't mine to share. I saw my son flinch as if struck, his hands clenching at his sides. "So everything you said, all those stories you never told, you were actually there?" His voice cracked, disbelief and guilt mingling in the tremor. "Yes," I said quietly. "Every day, every night. I carried it all home in silence because that was my duty, not for recognition, not for thanks." The judge nodded, slowly, allowing the gravity of my words to settle. "And you never claimed credit in public?" I shook my head. I never needed it. The lives we saved, the missions completed, that was enough. Silence is not dishonor. My son's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the floor, then back at my son, who was staring at me with a mix of awe, anger, and regret. The courtroom felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in as the full weight of decades of secrecy pressed against us all. I leaned back slightly, feeling the hardness of the wooden chair beneath me, the weight of my years and my experiences settling in my bones. Memories rose unbidden, nights under a foreign sky, listening to the distant sound of mortar fire, holding the hands of men dying quietly, without witnesses, without acknowledgement. My life had been a ledger of silence, every sacrifice noted in memory alone. My son's voice broke the quiet. I can't believe you never told me. All these years, I thought you were just ordinary." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the boy I had once held as a child, the young man who had believed bravado, and appearances mattered more than truth. I thought of all the birthdays I missed, the holidays I spent overseas, the empty seats at graduations, and yet I felt no bitterness, only the resolve that carried me through deserts, firefights, and the endless nights of fear. "You believed I was ordinary because I never made about me," I said softly. I served in silence. I loved my country and protected people who could never know my name. That was enough. That's what mattered. The judge leaned forward, her gaze shifting between us. "Mr. Harris, Jr., do you understand now?" He swallowed hard. I think I do. I didn't know." I could see the weight of shame pressing down on him, the realization that he had publicly dismissed a lifetime of sacrifice. I remembered the sharp words in court, his mocking tone, the betrayal that cut deeper than any battlefield wound ever could. Yet I didn't speak again. I let the silence convey the depth of the lessons learned too late. The judge picked up another document from the folder, her voice steady. "These records also include commendations for acts of bravery that prevented casualties during covert missions." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Mr. Harris, your son has made serious allegations against your service. Do you have evidence to counter them?" I nodded slowly, placing my hands firmly on the table. "Everything is here. Every mission, every operation documented, verified, classified. It's all here in the envelope, Your Honor." My son's face paled, the confidence he carried like armor now gone, replaced by a realization he could no longer ignore. The courtroom air seemed to thicken further as the judge set the documents carefully aside, glancing at both of us. "You've lived with these truths silently for decades," she said, her tone almost gentle. "And now the court sees them. We will proceed with this in mind. I let my gaze drift to the sunlight streaming through the tall courthouse windows, dust motes floating in golden rays, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. I had borne silence for years. Now, finally, truth had a voice. The courtroom remained hushed, the weight of the documents and photographs settling over everyone like an invisible pressure. My son sat rigid, his eyes wide, shoulders stiff as if bracing himself for a storm he had thought he controlled. The judge looked at me, patient but firm. "Mr. Harris, would you like to explain the content of Exhibit C?" I inhaled slowly, feeling the memory of distant deserts and foreign skies pressing behind my ribs. I could hear the faint hum of a helicopter from a flashback, feel the grit of sand in my boots, the sweat on my brow, the fear in men who trusted me with their lives. "Exhibit C," I said, "contains records of missions that were never meant for public eyes. Lives saved, operations completed, losses endured, all in silence. I never shared them because those who served beside me, some never returned." The judge nodded solemnly. "And your son believed you had fabricated your service?" "Yes," I replied softly, almost to myself. He didn't see the uniform I wore in secret, the missions I took, the lives I protected. He only saw what I allowed him to see, a father at home, seemingly absent, never heroic in the ways the world recognizes. But the truth lives quietly in memory and sacrifice. My son's face went pale, the first real emotion breaking through his mask of arrogance. Fear, disbelief, and regret mingled in a swirl I had never allowed to be visible. I didn't know," he whispered, voice tight. I thought you were lying, making it up." I didn't respond immediately. I let him sit with it, let the weight of decades of misunderstanding press down on him. "You assume because you want to believe that story," I said finally, "but the truth doesn't need your belief. It only needs recognition." The judge glanced down at the documents again, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Harris, these records are extraordinary. They prove the service your son questioned. But there is more. Please explain the confidential files." I reached slowly for the next folder in the envelope. Its edges were worn, creased from years of careful storage, from the times I touched it alone in quiet moments at home. Opening it revealed pages I hadn't shared with anyone, reports of classified missions, commendations, and finally a list of names. Names of the men who had served beside me and paid the ultimate price. I looked at my son, whose eyes darted nervously across the room, unable to look directly at the pages or at me. "You don't understand," I said, voice steady but low, "that every day I carried these names, their sacrifices, their absence. I carried it all home silently, so that life could go on, so that you could grow up believing there was a man at home, alive and present. I never asked for recognition. I never needed it." The judge's hands rested on the table, stilling the papers. "And now, Mr. Harris, Jr., you see why your statements in this courtroom were inaccurate?" He nodded, swallowing hard, his hands tightening in his lap. "Yes, I see now. I was wrong. I never understood. I thought—" "Your understanding isn't required," I said calmly. "Recognition of truth, however, is." A tense silence filled the room. My son's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but he was no longer the same confident man who had stood before me moments ago. That mask had fallen. What remained was raw, unvarnished realization, the knowledge that he had publicly dishonored a lifetime of hidden service. I thought of the countless nights alone, the letters I never sent, the deployments I never spoke of, the medals that never hung in public view. I thought of the weight I carried silently, the honor I bore quietly. And in that moment I felt something shift, not just in my son, but in the room itself. Truth had finally been placed where it belonged, and it carried a gravity that couldn't be ignored. The judge finally spoke, her tone deliberate, almost soft. "The court acknowledges the veracity of Mr. Harris's service. These documents will be filed under sealed records. The matter of the will and contested inheritance will proceed with this context in mind. My son sat back, still pale, still trembling slightly. I didn't look at him directly. I kept my gaze forward, focused on the quiet sunlight spilling to the tall courthouse windows, thinking of every mission, every loss, every silent night I had endured to stand here today and be seen. Finally, without words, without pretense, the courtroom felt smaller now, the tension thick as humid air, pressing down on everyone in the room. My son's hands were fidgeting in his lap, fingers tapping nervously against each other, his eyes darting to the envelope that had upended every assumption he had about me. He had spent decades imagining my life in shadows, assuming my silence meant nothing, that my absences were careless. But now, confronted with the truth, he couldn't look me in the eye. The judge leaned forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Mr. Harris, your son has called into question the legitimacy of your entire lifetime of service. How do you respond to these allegations now that the documents have been presented?" I inhaled, letting the weight of years settle on my shoulders. "I have nothing to add beyond what is already here," I said softly. "All that matters is that the truth is finally in front of him. And perhaps now he will understand that service is not measured by visibility or applause." My son let out a shaky breath. "Dad, I don't even know where to start." His voice faltered, thick with a mixture of shame and awe. I misjudged everything. I called you a liar. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. My years had taught me that silence could carry as much weight as words. "Yes," I said simply, "you did. And now you have the opportunity to reckon with that. Not for me, but for yourself." He swallowed hard, eyes brimming with unshed tears. And for a moment, I saw the boy I once held on his 5th birthday, the one who had clung to me as if I were the only constant in a world too big for him to understand. He had grown into a man of ambition and pride. But in that moment, stripped of pretense, he looked vulnerable and human. The judge nodded toward the envelope, now mostly emptied of its contents. "Mr. Harris, there's one final item here that requires clarification. The documents also include sealed operational commendations, awards that cannot be publicly disclosed but are critical to understanding the context of your service. Can you explain?" I reached slowly for the last folder, the one that had never left my possession until now. Opening it, I revealed certificates, letters of commendation, and records marked classified. "These are acknowledgments from the missions that were never meant to exist in public record," I said quietly. "I carried these in my heart, never expecting anyone else to see them, because the acts themselves were never about recognition. They were about duty, about protecting lives, even when no one knew or would ever know." My son's face had turned pale, the arrogance he relied on for so long dissolving under the weight of evidence. His lawyer murmured something, but he wasn't listening. His eyes stayed fixed on me, a mixture of guilt and realization washing over him. I didn't realize," he whispered, voice tight. I thought your absence meant you didn't care, that you weren't brave, that you were ordinary." I shook my head slowly. Ordinary is measured by what is visible. Courage is measured by what is endured quietly. I have spent my life in the unseen spaces where most people cannot follow. That does not make it less real. It makes it sacred. The judge's gaze softened slightly. "Mr. Harris, Jr., do you understand now why your statements were not only incorrect but hurtful?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, I understand. I was wrong. I have no excuse. I never knew. I never tried to know." I kept my eyes on him, letting my silence weigh as heavily as the words I had spoken. This was his reckoning, not mine. He would carry this moment with him, the realization of a lifetime of misunderstanding, a father's silent sacrifices finally acknowledged. The judge closed the folder carefully, placing it back into the envelope. "The court acknowledges Mr. Harris's service as legitimate. Classified though it may be, the matter of inheritance will now proceed with this context understood. I exhaled slowly, the tension that had held me taut for decades beginning to loosen. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of unseen burdens ease slightly, knowing that the truth was finally recognized, even if only in the confines of a sealed courtroom. My son looked at me, unsteady, searching for words, for forgiveness, for understanding. I didn't answer. I simply nodded once, the quiet acknowledgement of truth passing between us. He had finally seen me. Not the father he imagined, not the man he doubted, but the soldier, the protector, the man who had carried the world silently on his shoulders. Outside, sunlight streamed to the courthouse windows, casting long golden lines across the polished floor. For a fleeting moment, the noise and chaos of the world seemed distant. Inside this room, amidst documents and silent acknowledgments, a lifetime of service had finally found its witness. The courtroom was still, but the tension had shifted. Where moments ago there had been confrontation and accusation, now there was something heavier, reflection. My son sat rigid, eyes fixed on the table, grappling with truths he had refused to imagine until now. I could feel the gravity of his realization, the slow erosion of his pride, the weight of years of misunderstanding pressing down on him like a storm he had no shelter from. The judge cleared her throat, her gaze moving between us. Mr. Harris, the court acknowledges the veracity of your service. However, the matter of your estate remains in dispute. Your son has challenged you based on assumptions that have now been corrected. I nodded slowly. I had expected this part of the process. The legalities, the letters and documents, the dispute over inheritance. It was small compared to the decades I had spent in silence, the lives I had carried in my memory. Still, I would face it, as I had faced everything, calmly, deliberately, without the need for spectacle. The judge looked at my son. Do you wish to speak on your father's behalf, now that the court has reviewed these documents? He hesitated, swallowed hard, and finally spoke, voice tight with emotion. I was wrong. I questioned everything about my father. I didn't understand. I called him a liar. He broke off, struggling to find the words that could carry the weight of guilt he felt. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my hands resting on the table. I had no need to speak. He needed to grapple with the truth himself. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. He took a shaky breath. I know I can't take back what I said. I know I've hurt him, hurt you, and his eyes finally met mine unguarded, raw. I don't know if he can forgive me, but I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that he finally acknowledged the truth. Sorrow for the years of distance, the misunderstandings, the silent heartbreak. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the weight of those years settle between us. Finally, I spoke, quiet but steady. I never expected your understanding. I only hoped you would see that some truths are not spoken to be heard. They are lived to be felt. You are seeing it now. The judge nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment more than the words themselves could convey. Mr. Harris, Jr., the court expects your conduct to reflect this new understanding moving forward. The matter of inheritance will proceed with the knowledge of your father's legitimate service taken into account. My son nodded, swallowing hard. He seemed smaller somehow, humbled, the arrogance he had relied upon for years stripped away. He looked at me again, searching for guidance, for some acknowledgement that our relationship could survive this revelation. I gave a slow nod, the simplest affirmation that the door was open, though it would take time for trust to be rebuilt. The documents were gathered, the envelope placed carefully back into the folder. The judge dismissed the officers who had secured the room, and the courtroom slowly returned to normal. The hum of the projector faded, replaced by the soft rustle of papers and low murmurs among the spectators. I stood, feeling the weight of the years behind me. My son remained seated for a moment longer, as if grounding himself in the reality of what he had just witnessed. I watched him, Recognizing the boy I had held on his first day of school, the young man I had encouraged from a distance through silent pride. He was learning to see me, not as the absent father he imagined, but as the man I had always been. The judge called us forward one last time. This concludes the court's review of the contested service. Further proceedings regarding the state will take place in a regular session, but the father's military service has been fully verified and acknowledged. I nodded, accepting the formality, while my son lingered behind, processing. I could see the shift in him, a subtle but profound transformation. The arrogance and doubt had faded, replaced by something heavier, more considered, respect, understanding, and perhaps the first stirrings of genuine remorse. Outside, sunlight streamed to the courthouse windows, casting the room in warm gold. I breathed in slowly, the quiet calm of acknowledgement settling over me. This was not triumph. This was resolution. The invisible burden I had carried for decades, the years of silent service, the ghosts of comrades, the unspoken sacrifices, was finally recognized. And in that recognition, I found a measure of peace. The courthouse emptied slowly, leaving a hushed quiet that felt almost sacred. The echo of footsteps and murmurs lingered like shadows, but inside me, a weight had lifted, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for decades. My son walked beside me, tentative, his posture stiff, as if he were learning to navigate a new landscape of understanding, one he'd ignored for far too long. We stepped outside, and the sunlight hit my face like a long-forgotten warmth. Dust motes floated in the golden rays, dancing in the wind that carried a faint scent of autumn leaves and distant streets. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing it in. After years of shadows and silence, after decades of service unacknowledged, the world felt both sharp and forgiving at once. My son cleared his throat, voice quiet. Dad, I don't know how to say this. I've said a lot of things I shouldn't have. I was wrong about you, about everything. I kept my gaze forward, not yet ready to look at him. I never expected words. Son, understanding comes slowly. Truth is often heavier than words can carry. He fell silent, nodding. I felt his hesitation, the awkwardness of a man who had spent a lifetime believing he knew everything about the father beside him, only to realize he had known almost nothing. I want to make it right. He finally said, I can't take back the past, but I want to try. I don't want this to be the end between us. I turned to him slowly, seeing the young man and the boy he had once been mingled in the same face. Pride, fear, regret, and hope all at once. I nodded, letting the gesture carry what words could not. Then start by seeing me, truly seeing me. That is all I ask. He swallowed hard, tears glimmering at the corners of his eyes. I see you now, he said quietly. I understand. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of recognition, of the weight of truth finally landing where it belonged. I remembered every mission, every loss, every secret I had carried home, and for the first time, those memories felt lighter, not because they were forgotten, but because they were finally witnessed, acknowledged by the person I had hoped would one day understand. We walked down the courthouse steps together. Side by side, the city unfolding before us. I felt the texture of my life, the years of service, the quiet sacrifices, the nights alone, settling into a rhythm of closure I had never allowed myself to imagine. My son kept his eyes on me, tentative but sincere, as if learning for the first time what it meant to honor the truth of another person's life. I thought of the men I had served with, their names etched into memory, their sacrifices hidden in plain sight. I had carried them silently for decades, but now I carried them knowing that their stories, their bravery, had reached a witness, even if only in fragments, even if only through me. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows, and I realized that the weight of invisibility was no longer mine alone to bear. My son would carry part forward, differently now, with understanding and respect, rather than ignorance and mockery. He stopped beside me, hesitant. Dad, I don't know if I can ever fully repay you, or even understand fully, but I want to try. I want to learn from you. I want to be worthy of your story. I placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and unflinching. You don't need to repay me. Just live with integrity. Stand still when it matters. Carry the truth, even when no one sees it. That is how lives like ours endure. He nodded, swallowing hard, absorbing the gravity of the moment. We stood in silence, father and son, the distance of years and misunderstandings closing slowly, carefully, like the tide returning to shore. The world continued around us, indifferent and bustling, but inside that quiet space, I felt a profound peace. Not triumph, not vindication, but acknowledgement, respect, and the knowledge that my life, my service, and my sacrifices, once invisible, had finally found their witness. And in that witness, I realized legacy is not in what is celebrated, but in what is endured and quietly carried forward, seen only by those who understand. My son had begun to understand. That was enough. The sun dipped lower, painting the city gold. I straightened my back, inhaled the cool air, and walked forward, side by side with the boy I had raised, now a man beginning to see the weight and the dignity of father's silent life. Peace had finally arrived.